My name is Wendy Q, and I'm the officer in charge for the Interagency Standing Committee Secretariat, and I have the honor to host today's briefing. So just a few introductory remarks. As you know, artificial intelligence has the potential to reshape the way we deliver and coordinate humanitarian action. Experts suggest that it could help address some chronic issues that have hindered effective and accountable humanitarian action, and artificial intelligence could transform how humanitarian actors coordinate, how decision makers access critical information, and how accountability is provided to communities affected by disasters. Conversely, artificial intelligence can also turbocharge risks. Irresponsible use of artificial intelligence could intentionally or unintentionally exacerbate bias in delivery, exclude vulnerable groups from life-saving support, or spread false information, and it also poses fundamental concerns for data security. International dialogues and forums such as the Secretary General's Common Agenda and Summit for the Future, held in September this year, signal a growing consensus on the need for global governance to regulate the use of artificial intelligence. These regulations should be grounded in the diversity of expertise and balance risks with fostering innovation. Over the past few years, humanitarian organizations have pioneered and implemented AI applications across a wide range of functions. These efforts have yielded early lessons covering technical, financial, ethical, and other critical aspects, and these lessons should be examined and built upon. Today's speakers will shed light on the implications of artificial intelligence for humanitarian action and on emerging practices and initiatives. We will gain insights from early adopters who have invested in exploring the potential of artificial intelligence to increase efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability of aid. And we'll reflect on some of the potential risks and concerns around ethics, governance, and technological inequality. So I'm very pleased to have a panel of distinguished speakers, and I'm very fortunate and honored to have with us today Mr. Amandeep Singh Gill, the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, also known as the Tech Envoy, and he's also the chair of the UN High-Level Advisory Panel on Artificial Intelligence. I have also Christopher Harland. Chris Harland is a legal advisor and deputy permanent observer at the International Committee for Red Cross delegation to the UN in New York. I have Karen Massel, who's the chief executive officer of Data Friendly Space, and Mr. Michael Bugambe, the deputy director for information technology, International Organization for Migration. And Christine will be a discussant at the end of the panel. She's from Ethics Minds Institute. So following this panel, there will be time for discussion. However, as I mentioned earlier, at any time, if you have questions, you can share comments or questions in the chat function. Let me begin now by inviting USG Gill to speak first. Dr. Amandeep Singh Gill was appointed Undersecretary General and the United Nations Secretary General's Technological Envoy in June 2022. In this role, he spearheads the Secretary General's strategic initiatives on technology, facilitates coordination across the UN system, and engages with stakeholders and partners globally. He is also a member of the Secretary General's high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence and on his scientific advisory board. A thought leader on digital technology, USG Gill brings a solid understanding of how to leverage digital transformation for progress on sustainable development goals. And in recognition of his influential work in the field of artificial intelligence, Time magazine named Mr. Gill as the most influential shaper of artificial intelligence in 2024. So USG Gill, would you kindly help us set the scene regarding artificial intelligence and its potential role in humanitarian action? And more specifically, what is the United Nations approach to the role and use of artificial intelligence? And if you could highlight some of the measures the United Nations has taken in this regards.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for the generous introduction. It's a pleasure to join this panel. And I'm bandwidth challenged today, so if there is an audio issue, I'll switch off the camera. You've already set the scene by talking about the opportunities and the risks of AI insofar as they apply to the humanitarian space. What I would like to do is first share with you an assessment of how significant the Summit of the Future was for us at the UN and in the adjacent international cooperation spaces in terms of decisions on AI. So at the summit, as part of the Pact for the Future, a global digital compact was adopted. This is the fruit of nearly 2 years of negotiations, and it's really an update on how the world comes together to govern digital technologies, to seize the opportunities, mitigate the risks. And what's significant about this new decision, this new intergovernmental decision, is that of the 5 sections that are part of the Global Digital Compact, one is devoted exclusively to AI, another one to data, because these are twins. You really cannot separate data governance from AI governance. So we have kind of shifted from the time of the World Summit on Information Society, where connectivity and content were key issues, to something like a modern version of digital technologies policy issues. The digital economy, building an inclusive digital economy, what role does data and AI play in that? So this is the significance broadly of what happened in September, and specifically on AI. And thanks also to the work of the SG's high-level advisory body on AI. I was privileged to serve as member secretary. An extraordinary group of 39 people from around the world who came together, and working with speed and urgency, they landed some powerful recommendations just in time for the summit negotiations conclusion. And there are 3 decisions that have been taken inside the compact. One on setting up a scientific panel, a little bit like the IPCC, but we shouldn't push this analogy too far, to give us updates on what does this technology mean in terms of capabilities for both opportunities and risks. Another one on a policy dialogue, so that different governance approaches can be shared. Some learning, obviously international learning, but also landing in shared norms, developing a common vocabulary. We are in some ways at the early stages of this. Artificial intelligence as a concept has been around since the 1940s and 50s, Alan Turing, the Dartmouth conference, and so on. But there is a new wave that's washing upon our shores. So there will be changes, and so it's important to be agile in our governance approaches and learn. And the third decision is on capacity building to manage the AI challenges and seize the opportunities. Very important, not only for the global south, but small countries who are not the leaders on AI development everywhere. So it's no longer, I don't think it's a north-south issue, it's an everyone issue. So capacity development, access to talent, to data, to the compute infrastructure, to some of the metrics of progress and assessment, and so on. So we've kind of placed the UN at the heart of this conversation. UN was at the risk of being placed on the sidelines, a few countries driving this. So now with these decisions, so set the scene for you on the humanitarian space. I would caution us all against looking at AI as a panacea for problems. A lot of people will try and sell you snake oil. There's, by the way, a nice book called AI Snake Oil. Nice assessment of what works, what doesn't work. I think we have to be careful in our work to ensure that whatever tools we use are fit for purpose. They've been designed with protection, with governance, with safety and security in mind, with ethics as the backdrop, with engagement and involvement of those we set out to benefit. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, as the WAG says. So, we have to be careful in what kind of solutions we pick. At the end of the day, our problems are analog, and technology is an enabler, a facilitator. However, this said, I think the humanitarian space has to organize itself to better deal with AI in the next 3 to 5 years. So not look at the coming months and years as the time to rapidly grab solutions and throw them at our analog problems, but to prepare. Prepare means, having the right talent, recruiting people, getting people who understand data, digital transformation, and AI, working with such people. Second, to build our own capacities to handle data, to curate data sets, to protect them, there's a huge way to go, and our colleague from the ICRC may share some in protecting data. And then, what kind of models, solutions we want to build and with whom. So I think next few years we can get ready so that when the next wave of this technology, and more waves are coming, hits us, then we are ready to. I will not go into specific use cases. There's plenty of literature out there, digital humanitarianism. We have some experience from UNHCR, from WFP, the hunger map, for example. It's a very nice, I promised myself I will not speak of solutions, but here I am. Hunger map using data sets around conflict to kind of predict, in a sense, predictive analytics, very tricky part of AI, but here we are. So to predict food insecurity in advance. So those are some of the kind of nice examples we can fall back on in the UN context. But 90% of this is someone trying to kind of sell you something that may not work. I've been in the digital health and AI health space before stepping back into the UN. A lot of things that work in silica, they break down when you take them to the messy analog world. So let's be careful there, and I'll stop there. And thank you so much.
GSG, Jill, it's true that in the many humanitarian contexts, it is a very messy analog space. And with that, I would like to turn now to Chris Harland. As I mentioned earlier, Chris Harland is the head of humanitarian affairs and deputy permanent observer at the International Committee of the Red Cross Permanent Observer Mission to the UN in New York. And he previously held legal positions in the ICRC in New York, Washington, Kuala Lumpur, New Delhi, and Geneva. And he's worked with the United Nations and other international organizations in Rwanda, where I know him from, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Cyprus, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Chris, from the perspective of humanitarian principles, as USG Jill mentioned, what are some of the ethical implications and risks associated with the uses of artificial intelligence? And what is the ICRC approach to artificial intelligence and humanitarian action? Over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Wendy, and for those questions, and thank you to the IASC Secretariat for organizing today's briefing. It's a very interesting topic generally, and for us in the ICRC. And I'll just echo some of the words of USG Gill, that there are positives and some worrying elements relating to digitalization, I would say more generally, including AI. Some of the positives that we've seen as the ICRC are telemedicine, digital cash transfers, providing information as a part of aid, and some early warning systems. Some of the worrying elements that we've seen are that aid can become a little bit less human and a little bit more opaque. We've seen also misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech increased through the use of online tools. We've seen polarization of countries and communities increase as well. And we've seen some groups be targeted for attacks based on some digital elements. This isn't new, of course, but we've seen an increase in it in some places. We've also seen algorithmic discrimination, digital exclusion, and what some people call surveillance humanitarianism. So the question we've had to ask ourselves is how to strike a balance, how to decide when to use digital products, including AI. So before getting into that, maybe just to try to define artificial intelligence, we aren't aware of a globally agreed definition yet. The one that we're using is the following: any system, tool, or technology that involves the use of computer systems to carry out tasks that would ordinarily require human cognition, planning, or reasoning. So it's the last part of that phrase that's probably the most important: ordinarily require human cognition, planning, or reasoning. So when we look at AI, we've been working in the last year on a new policy that will guide the ICRC's internal action relating to artificial intelligence. We hope in the next few weeks to make this public, this new policy public on AI, and it may prove useful to some other humanitarian organizations who wish to take elements from that. So I say watch this space. A key element of that is exactly a value-based approach. And so, Wendy, when we look at the fundamental principles of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement and the four elements of that, which are in the humanitarian principles, we look first at humanity, of course. And for us, the starting point is whether an AI tool can alleviate the suffering of people affected by armed conflict. That is our first test. That's usually a yes, otherwise we wouldn't be interested in the product. But we also incorporate a do no harm approach. We look at the safety, dignity, and the long-term secondary impacts of new approaches. So that's one element that goes in. We also pay attention to whether the use and development of the AI solution that's proposed would jeopardize our ability to demonstrate humanity and empathy through direct and in-person human engagement. And that's an important one. I think it's sometimes overlooked, but I think build that into your thinking as well when you go forward. So that's the first element, humanity. Secondly, impartiality. This is a tough one too. There are significant risks of AI systems generating false or inaccurate data, the hallucination kind of issue. And these can replicate or amplify systemic and societal discrimination, biases, and stereotypes, in particular around gender and race. And so we seek to mitigate this and certainly pay heavy attention to it. We also want AI solutions to be inclusive by design and enable fair, non-discriminatory, equitable delivery of assistance. So that's the second one, impartiality. Third, neutrality and independence together. Well, AI, we know, is an object of increasing polarization, both among governments and in private sectors. We pay specific attention to taking all feasible measures to ensure that our choices of AI tools and providers can't be easily instrumentalized to challenge our neutrality and independence. So we ask ourselves, well, what will be the effect on the ICRC's action? Or it's the perception of the ICRC's action if we use tool X. And we seek to use AI providers that are either not directly engaged in an armed conflict or closely associated with the military activities of parties to armed conflict. It's not always easy, but we're worried about the promotion of political interests or values that are contradictory to the ICRC's humanitarian mandate and to our own ethical values. So where relevant, one of the things that we're trying to do is to use free or open source AI solutions. It's not always easy to find them, and they don't always work properly, but those can help mitigate the risk of dependency on proprietary tools that may be linked to one side to an armed conflict. So what does this mean in practice? So I'll give you two examples. First, trace the face. So this was a project that we looked to try to take pictures that have been published throughout the world on the web, and to seek to try to find persons that had gone missing in armed conflict based on the photographs and other information that we had directly from the families. So in the end, we did not go forward with this. We weren't in a position to mitigate some of the risks associated with this, partly because we couldn't see behind the data. Of course, you lose transparency on it. And we were worried enough about false positives, and we had some question about how well it would work in practice. It didn't generate enough, also, but the risks associated with it meant that it wasn't justified. Not to say that this could never work in the future, but we were quite cautious about that, so we didn't go forward with that project. Secondly, one we have been using, we're starting to use in a little bit more detail, is called Meditron. And this helps support medical diagnoses in the field. So, for example, when we look at our health providers that are trying to give practical information to people that come into a clinic, we give you an example. What's the recommended treatment protocol for a patient with suspected typhoid fever when laboratory diagnoses are unavailable? Or, I have to fit an elderly patient with above-knee prosthesis. Which should I propose, a single axis or a polycentric knee? Or, for example, with a general surgeon in a war setting, what's the recommended surgical approach for a compound femur fracture with bone loss according to wound management manuals? Or, a program manager of a conflict zone hospital. What are the best practices for organizing an operating theater to handle a surge of trauma patients during a mass casualty incident? These are the types of questions that our medical providers in the field ask. And so we have now a system in place where we are looking to be able to answer these types of questions by taking information from our own internal products, and then also looking at publicly available peer-reviewed medical information, which can add to that. So again, this isn't something that is forward-facing for the client. The client who comes in with a problem, like for example, the elderly patient who needs a prosthesis, that's not where we use the AI tool, but we use it for the medical practitioner to make sure that they're giving the absolute best medical care possible. So that's where it's been, I think, a little bit more successful, is on the internal use of AI rather than the forward client-facing use of it. And I just maybe close by mentioning that this is important. What's really important, and I really echo what USG Gill said about data. AI is it's basically data. And so it's really key to know where you're getting your data from. I think that would be one really cautious, important tool. For example, I mean, you may have heard there were some publications earlier this year that got after Google's AI assistant because it was still producing a problematic response to the question, how many rocks should I eat each day? And it was saying, well, you should eat a small amount, either from a little bit of dust particles up to a 5-kilogram rock every day for good health. And the reason it was doing that is because it was scraping the web. And in 2021, The Onion, satirical newspaper, published an article saying, well, rocks contain potassium and other minerals, and so therefore you should eat rocks every day. And Google couldn't tell the difference on its data set between something that was completely false and wasn't. So again, I would absolutely stress that. So happy to engage more about those elements, but those are now the value-based approach, the guiding principles that we, the ICRC, use. Thanks very much, Wendy.
Thanks, Chris. And it's a good segue to our next speaker, which is Karen Mazel from Data Friendly Space. As Chief Executive Officer, she leads a global data and technology NGO that equips social impact organizations with trusted digital tools and actionable data. And over the past decade, Data Friendly Space has emerged as a pioneer in implementing both artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence solutions within the humanitarian data ecosystem. Data Friendly Space has partnered with humanitarian agencies to develop digital public goods that facilitate joint and timely humanitarian data analysis, including DEEP, which is Data Entry and Exploration Platform, and Gannett, which is a collaborative generative AI-powered tool to extract, analyze, and visualize life-saving information. With more than 15 years of experience in the humanitarian sector, Karen has worked with Save the Children and Finn Church Aid, and prior to joining Data Friendly Space, she was the head of Africa Department at the Estonian Center for International Development, and currently she's also board chair of the Geneva-based H2H network, an alliance that brings together high-quality technical service providers working in support of the broader humanitarian community. Karen, we heard from Chris some of the dangers about data, but also some of the potential uses. Could you please give us some practical examples of Data Friendly Space's collaboration with humanitarian actors and highlight how artificial intelligence is empowering global humanitarian data analysis?
Thanks, Wendy, and so nice to be here with everyone. I'll start by maybe unpacking what Data Friendly Space does a little bit. So at Data Friendly Space, people often ask us what the problem is that we are tackling in the humanitarian sector. And I guess the sentence we always reach for the most is that many of us in the sector are drowning in information, but still are starving for insights. Particularly insights that are granular and localized and that are real-time, but at the same time contextually sensitive and reliable. And organizations also today find themselves often detached from what everyone else is doing, particularly in relation to joint humanitarian analysis. And instead, they are reaching for their own systems and their own methods, and instead of contributing to joint analysis with other organizations. And while we often talk about in this humanitarian sector the need for more coordinated action, what we don't always realize that it all needs to start with also coordinated understanding of situations and needs. And that is why joint analysis is such a crucial thing to push for as we are navigating in this space. So data-friendly space, DFS, is through our digital tools and our data analysis work, helping humanitarian organizations gather around as a community, use our digital tools to transform complex, often unstructured information that surrounds us into concrete insights for decision-making. And while doing this, we want our tools and analysis of crisis situations to be considered as seen as digital public goods, equally accessible to whether you're working in an international organization or a government or a local organization. So we started incorporating artificial intelligence capabilities into our tools about 4 or 5 years ago, starting with the data entry and exploration platform, where today natural language processing and language models are assisting users to automatize some of the really manual and time-consuming tasks related to secondary data analysis, from data extraction to data tagging and so forth. And this year, we've also launched the Joint Analysis Workspace as an extension to DEEP. Now we'll be integrating both qualitative and quantitative data into that collaborative analysis environment. DEEP today has around 7,000 plus registered users, humanitarian professionals in more than 90 countries, and the platform is one of the largest collaborative humanitarian analysis platforms globally. Now, about 1.5 years ago, we also started experimenting with generative AI. And this has today grown into an initiative or a toolkit we call GANIT. And this initiative was driven by a very clear need by the humanitarian community for real-time data analysis. That could be done in an efficient but accessible way. And generative AI as a technology gives us some of the tools to do just that. And today, the humanitarian community has access openly to the GANIT's virtual assistant, where users can query an up-to-date, carefully curated data set, not just anything out there from the web that might encourage us to eat rocks, but actually a very well curated data set that has been built by the humanitarian community itself, by getting in touch with us and telling us what are the data sources that you often rely on, the open data sources that you often rely on as you are doing your work. So far, the results have been quite promising, and we're seeing significant improvements in the speed of our analysis and our ability to extract truly up-to-date data. And in fact, users are also able to bring in information from a much wider variety and diversity of sources than ever before. And currently, we are using GANIT as a tool for our own data analysis, both in Sudan and in Lebanon, for instance. It's very important that the tools that are being built, largely for the humanitarian community, that are AI-powered, are compatible with existing processes for humanitarian analysis and not creating parallel ones that makes this entire process costly and inefficient. So when we have built DEEP and GANIT with the humanitarian community, then we've ensured to make them compatible with processes like the humanitarian needs overview, the humanitarian response plans, common country analysis, and this is really key as we're trying to drive efficiencies and additional insights into already established processes. So perhaps before I close, to pull back to a bigger picture, all of this work means that we as data-friendly space often get pulled into really interesting conversations with organizations that are either really advanced in their AI adoption or just dipping their toes in and seeing where it can support their activities. And essentially, in a big picture, what we're really looking to do, right, as a community, is to see how humanitarian AI-powered solutions can help us best identify and anticipate humanitarian needs, given the complexity and scale of need, but also the information that surrounds us. And don't forget that we're also in an environment where we are facing limited resources. We need to become increasingly efficient while not compromising on accuracy, relevance, and trust. So looking forward to unpacking some of these opportunities, but also the challenges we're facing in our work in the Q&A stage. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that that initial oversight, and I look forward to hearing more in the discussion time. And now I'd like to turn to our last but not least speaker, Mr. Michael Bugembe. Mike Bugembe is a best-selling author and international speaker, serving as Deputy Director for Information Technology at the International Organization for Migration, IOM. He's known for his expertise in tech for good, data, and artificial intelligence, and was named as one of the leading figures in tech and data-driven businesses in 2014. He's received many awards and has shared the stage with people like Garry Kasparov and the late Stephen Hawking. So it is both his work and passion to introduce innovative technology solutions to traditionally tech-neglected sectors, I guess that's us, aiming for significant impact and a focus on the good. Mike, we'd love to hear from you how you are using artificial intelligence in IOM and how it's being operationalized for frontline responders. Over to you.
Thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. I can't help but cringe around some of the things that are there, but they are indeed true and enjoyable. But I'll sort of follow on from a lot of what the other speakers have said. It's a great opportunity to sort of share this exciting, and I do believe it's a superbly exciting time that we're in, with technology that could genuinely transform a lot of our activities and the things that we're doing. And perhaps I'll focus a little bit on how we've introduced AI into our organization, maybe starting from the generative AI perspective, where we had a real opportunity in sort of at the end of last year, beginning of this year, trying to understand how best to do it. And we got to a stage where we had a choice. We could either release, a few hundred licenses to a few people around Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, which is what we were using, or we could go big and sort of just take a big gamble and release a few thousand licenses, right? Now, I'm new to the UN system, and as I was still very new and could use that as an excuse, I took very much the jump in with both feet approach, and I said, let's release a few thousand licenses, right? And now there's a little bit of if you like, thinking behind this madness. There's some method behind this madness. So if you look back to Slack in around 2014, 2012, the way they grew, right? So they grew really from the ground up. They grew through word of mouth. They were able to identify emergent properties or emerging functionalities. But more importantly, they were able to learn from their users, from what the people out there were doing with the technology. And there's a little bit of humility there in terms of not saying we know everything that you're going to be using and we're going to control that, but actually we trust you as grown-ups. Let's see what we can do with some of this tech, and at the same time putting in some safety measures and so forth to be safe. And I've got to say, it was an absolutely useful and fantastic exercise. When we first did it, we had about 48% adoption, so a little less than half in our initial release. But then what we did is we started to try and learn from that audience. We saw there was a lot of fear. Some people had already began to start thinking that generative AI was going to replace a lot of their work. So there was some genuine, trepidation around being able to use this technology. There was a huge amount of pessimism. People would say, "Oh, I've tried it once and it didn't do what I expected it to do, so I'm not going to bother," right? And then there was this relentless focus on safety, which I think was appropriate in some degree, but just almost to the expense of innovation, if I was to be honest, right? And so what we did is we released an approach called the 3 Cs, which was all around getting everybody to understand that instead of fear, AI is not here to replace you, but to collaborate with you. And we had some fantastic examples of how we could see superior performance when you worked with AI, as opposed to working outside of AI or not with AI at all, right? The second C was all around consistency, and we got people to understand that it's really a conversation, particularly with generative AI, how you could not get the result you wanted the first time, but try again and engage and continue that sort of conversation. It was interesting that there was such a major mind shift that needed to take place at that particular time. And the last one was really to just make a small shift towards creativity. where we could see people come up with some amazing things and use cases that no one else in the organization was thinking of, right? So just looking at people in the fringes of the company. And just by doing those 3 C's, we went from 48% adoption to 81% monthly active users, right? And that's people using it every single month. When we spoke to our users, they were telling us from a productivity standpoint, there was 70% of them were saying it saves them time, makes them more productive, takes an anecdote we're starting to use, takes the robot out of the human, right? So removing the mundane, repetitive tasks that allow them to stay focused on where they could really bring their expertise into play. From the quality perspective, we saw 65% of people were saying that it improved the quality of their work. Creativity, we saw that most people were saying that it helps them generate ideas and jumpstarts the creativity process. We even had a group of people that were using it for interviews in the recruitment process, and we were measuring some of that because that's quite important for us to sort of see success. And we were able to claw back 27,000 hours that were lost in the process of recruitment and all of the steps involved in that, just by introducing a little bit of artificial intelligence and AI. Now, a lot of these ideas that I've just shared with you and these things that we were able to see were very internally focused. And at IOM, of course, the migrant is our key constituent, right? The person that we serve. And it was important for us to start saying, well, where are some of the challenges and the opportunities that we could look at? And I think Karen, who spoke previously, talked about saying it's a great place to start by understanding what's the problem. Yeah. And one of the biggest problems we saw in the world of migration is safety and protecting people on the move, right? The information that's out there when it comes to migration is full of legal jargon, fragmented sources. It's outdated, and it basically creates opportunities for bad actors to now begin to exploit migrants. And as a result of that, we see a lot of fraud. We see people being smuggled. We see trafficking, and we had a meeting with Interval a couple of months ago around trafficking that's taking place in parts of Asia, where people are being promised jobs, tech jobs, right? So they're looking at qualified individuals, and once they get there, they're taken and forced to participate in tech scams and cryptocurrency scams. So these are educated people. So there is all that information out there that the bad actors are also beginning to use artificial intelligence for some of these purposes as well. And what we did is we said, well, we need to be ahead of that curve, right? Where this isn't going to be one of those technologies that we have the luxury of joining later on, right? Because others are going to exploit that. That's 6.5 billion pounds a year, by the way, made from the smuggling business, where they're using tech better than we are. So what we did is we jumped on the whole AI bandwagon again, and we did a hackathon, and we started to build around that. And we saw that we could get rid of some of the legal jargon by using artificial intelligence, right? And make it simple, jargon-free, and accessible to all. We could move from all the disjointed sources of information that we had by getting AI to consolidate the data from different places and work with, governments around migration information and so forth, and making that, available. And we could also deal with outdated information, right? And help with that. So we built a chatbot that could really do all of these pieces of work with the different key stakeholders, with governments, with people who hold migration information, but then make that available to migrants, and not as a new bot or something else that they had to download. We did it where migrants are, so that the bot would feature in WhatsApp, it would feature in Meta, it would feature in any of these places that would, make it so accessible. And a lot of people were like, well, it's just another chatbot, isn't it? And I said, well, not really, because we then interviewed a few migrants, and we're looking at things like, how long did it take you to find the opportunity to go to university in Canada? And they were like, it was months and months of research. I didn't even know what questions to ask, the sort of the anecdotes that we were getting back. But the chatbot within one session means multiple questions could be answered, and in a single session, you could answer so many questions that would take you months to be able to figure out. Migrants couldn't think of all the questions that they wanted to ask, but the chatbot was able to, bring up some of those itself and help them think about things that they had never considered. What's my diaspora community like there? Where are places that I can find particular types of food and things like that. But I think the coolest thing I will say about this is we introduced behavioral economics and taught the algorithm how to understand how people are feeling. Some people are scared. Some people are worried. Migration isn't something that everybody talks about openly. For some people, it's a very private thing. And the algorithm was able to be really sensitized to each and every one of those situations. So that's just one area. And I think there's a lot more exciting areas that we can, really explore. And I think one of the big lessons that I got from this was it's super important that we consider the safety of artificial intelligence. And indeed, I'm very much on that side. But there is always a risk that we can overshadow our need to innovate, particularly when there are other people out there, using it for nefarious purposes and really looking to innovate and transform what they can do with artificial intelligence. So yes, thank you very much. I'm really super excited to share more, and I could speak forever, but this is probably a good time for me to stop.
Thanks so much, Michael. Really interesting applications, real world use of artificial intelligence, and something that we would love to incorporate in our own organizations, I'm sure, in terms of efficiency. With that, we have also joined us Christine Housel, who, as a discussant, is going to, why don't you introduce yourself, Christine, and then react to the panel a little bit.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm working with Ethic Minds Institute, which is committed to gathering up the social questions and helping us make progress on them. And I'm also working with Multilateral Group Think Tank, which is committed to developing AI products and proposals which are human-centered and prioritize the human and have ethics at the base. So my job is really just to get the discussion going and to respond a little bit to the very wonderful inputs we've heard. I myself have a background in the humanities, and though my father was one of the first PhDs in computer science, I've felt a little alienation from tech over the years, and at the same time studied philosophy and studied theology and recognized that we're just in another phase of technology, and we've been dealing with technology as human beings all along the way, and many of the questions we're facing are not new. And so I observe that in most of our discourse, we talk about human-centered approaches, thankfully. And I wonder if we have given the full thought to what we mean when we say that. So we're rightly talking about the principles and the approaches that meet the need in our sector, in this case, the humanitarian sector. And it is already complex, as we see, but we also already see that it touches, to the issues that influence every sector. And I appreciate that we have an explicit ethical input in this panel. And I'm wondering, for the panelists, as we think about the ethics and the principles that apply to our discipline and the application of AI within, how can we also build our capacity to be responsible to the larger issues? If there's a push to accelerate AI for the good and to solve sustainability and humanitarian issues and many others, and really good thinking about how to do that on the one hand, we also have technologists who are some of the technologists who are driving innovation are cautioning of the actual existential threat to humanity that is kind of present in the exponentially growing tech, which even they don't understand. And I was recently reading another author who says, apart from that, apart from a worry of machines taking over the world or AI turning evil, there's some real danger about humans actually becoming passive in light of the intelligence of machines. He calls it a risk of super stupidity. of super intelligence or artificial general intelligence that is coming along the way. So I really appreciated the caution that we heard against looking at AI or any other technology to be a panacea for our problems. And I really appreciated that capacity building is one of the 3 strategies moving forward. And I'm wondering what kind of capacity building do we have in mind? And if we've begun to think about the need that we have as humans to make sure we're using it for our own purposes, to make sure that we feel empowered to keep making decisions, and not relinquish our decisions. So in that larger ethical point, I wonder if our panelists have some comments. And I'm wondering, how do we build trust? If Karen's talking about the need to build trust, and I'm wondering about apart from those nefarious purposes, which I think we're all working hard on, how can we, what strategies do we need to take to look at the ethics, which is the implications of our decisions, big and small, when so many of us are just learning about the tech? And I'm wondering too, when we talk about governance, many are talking about how a new approach to governance is needed. And in an environment where there's kind of a tech race, an AI race, how can we work with those companies and the private sector who are driving the innovation and not necessarily invested in these conversations? To begin, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christine. What I would like to do is I'd like to come back to Undersecretary General Jill, if he's still on the call with us, and ask him to respond to that question from Christine about both capacity building and also governance. And a follow-on question from that is, if we had the United Nations to help with some governance, what would be the way we could ensure compliance with some of the standards that we've set? Over to you, Mr. Jill.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think this notion of agency and not allowing our human agency over these critical sensitive areas to slip away, to leak agency to machines, to algorithms, that's very important. And I think that leads me to double down on preparing for the AI future, building capacity, understanding not only the exciting potential of the technology, but also its limitations. I'm afraid even in the top newspapers and magazines of the world, you see a lot of delusion about the capabilities of AI. So I think we have to really get ready for this. Now, on the governance aspect, I think in the UN, our role is to try and support member states and other stakeholders in crafting norms, shared norms. There's a very significant discussion happening on lethal autonomous weapon systems. I was involved in it some years back. There are other areas where these norms are being crafted. Some are softer than others. In the health space, for example, we are nowhere close to hard norms. It may take a while, but I think I'm quite excited about the potential of this policy dialogue. Currently, Spain and Costa Rica have just been appointed to figure out the modalities, the duration, the outcomes. So this is where we would start to build the shared normative foundations. We have a lot of norms already there. There are 100 plus principles-based approaches. But how do we kind of, leverage the interplay of soft and hard norms? And again, I'm quite confident that the UN's acquis of these norms, the human rights governance, international humanitarian law, and other norms around gender, child protection, etc., can be leveraged along with soft and semi-soft norms that are put together over a period of time to offer the world benchmarks for governance. And you would have to be active to push them out into various fields and find the leading champions who kind of champion those norms make sure that they stick and people are held accountable. Thank you.
Thanks, USG Jill. Can I encourage people to put questions in the chat, and we're going to continue to read them out and bring them to the panel's attention. So while I have you, USG Jill, there was a question from, I think, a youth envoy on tech who asks, how can we strike a balance between leveraging artificial intelligence for humanitarian efficiency while mitigating these risks for younger generations? These young generations make up the largest demographic of tech users, and what measures are being implemented to ensure accountability and prevent what you called snake oil solutions, especially when the consequences disproportionately affect our youth?
I think that's a great question. We could spend a lot of time on it. I think Christopher Harlan mentioned something very interesting. I really liked his distinction between the internal use and the external use, and his advocacy of caution with regard to external use. So let's explore the internal use, and also in some areas, Michael pointed out, where the last mile connection, like through chatbots, there is potential for training again. So if you can really mark out the data sets, both training and inference quite clearly, I've seen some good use cases in the agriculture space, for example, then, that keeps you on a kind of optimistic side of the spectrum. And that's a good way to engage the youth. I think younger innovators, modelers, and data scientists are quite excited to come under the SDGs umbrella, the humanitarian action umbrella, and contribute their skills, their insight. But our job is to make sure that they also understand the downside and they adopt ethical innovation practices. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Yushi. Now, I'd like to take some questions for Mike. Mike, there's a request for you to share some more examples of practice, field practice, and also both good and bad examples, if there are also any examples where things actually did not work out as anticipated.
Sure, right. So thank you very much. I think I can see that question in the chat. I think it's this one asking about what things went south with the approach that we took. Is that the one you were referring to, Wendy?
Yes, that's right. There's also an earlier one asking for more practical field examples. Okay,
maybe I'll answer them the other way around. There's a few field examples that we're working on. I've mentioned that one with the chatbot, but there's also things like in the climate change space. So trying to better understand, if you work with Google, for example, they claim that they can predict the likelihood of a flood within 2 weeks. Now, surely that must mean that we should be significantly more prepared when it comes to what's happening with the populations in that area. We've got patterns of migration. We've seen routes people take when they're making the decision to move. We understand everything about heat. We understand, the likelihood of damage by rainfall and so forth. So it definitely, using some of those predictive techniques that I think Amandeep shared about earlier, we're in a position to be much more proactive and prepared in advance. And the more data that we can capture, the better that we will be on that side of things. To the second point about what went south when we released all the licenses to people, whilst it worked well from an innovation perspective, one of the things I would always urge caution for is doing something like that will really expose how well your systems have sort of built-in governance, internal protection. If there's documents that are not marked private and perhaps should be, some things may be more accessible than others, but it also is a fantastic opportunity to begin to clean up your internal document repositories where people shouldn't be, leaving passwords in open files and sharing them in Outlook and things like that, because all of that becomes a little bit more obvious. So that was something that we learned pretty quickly, but fortunately we had anticipated to some degree as we were beginning to try and understand the bounds and limitations of this tool, as it has access to all of the our own personal individuals' data at that particular time. So those were a couple of things that were there. Wendy, let me know if there's any more that you want me to share on that.
Okay, I'm actually going to ask a question that's dear to my heart and let any of you respond to, so you just unmute yourself and jump in. But at the Interagency Standing Committee, we always say that collaboration and coordination is much better than competition in the humanitarian space. So the question is also, how can we prevent competition between emerging data labs with different agencies and focus on consolidating analytical bodies? I think this is kind of the phrase that Karen used, that we're drowning in information but starving for analysis, to leverage shared data and AI capabilities. And if we don't take action, more think tanks may continue to emerge and address these challenges independently. So like Family Feud, Karen's hit the button first, so I'm going to hand the floor to Karen.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Roberto, and like you, Wendy, I like that question a lot. But my counter question perhaps is, why are we so fearful of competition within the humanitarian sector? And I believe, at least, that from the kind of selection of different actors that are developing both artificial intelligence solutions and are building think tanks around it, isn't the point that competition and being able to learn also from others kind of drives up the quality of the services that we're providing. And we need to somewhat trust the market forces functioning within the humanitarian service ecosystem, that those that are not coordinating enough, those are not being open enough and inclusive enough, that those actors will simply not last for a very long time. So I would say that we should not be fearful of competition in the sector, and we need to just kind of take advantage of this and use that as a momentum to be better ourselves. I also want to say that just because the solutions are out there, that says nothing about user uptake. And I think that's what we need to focus on. A lot of the narrative today and a lot of the different solutions popping up, we're not yet seeing AI-powered, and definitely not generative AI-powered solutions in the humanitarian sector that are being used at scale and consistently. We're seeing, at least from these open tools that we are building in a number of other organizations, that there's kind of these hype cycles around the uptake of these tools. So I think the real competition lies in understanding what users want, what keeps them coming back, what gets them to trust the tools that are being used, that are being built, and so forth. And before passing it on, because I know others will want to answer to this as well, I think I really want to touch upon this issue of trust and just encouraging us to caution that largely the erosion of trust in AI systems today has emerged due to a narrative. And Christine, you've mentioned that yourself. The narrative, the anti-AI narrative, the narrative of fear is incredibly strong, and a lot of it grounded in real challenges and real risk. What needs to start balancing that narrative is concrete examples of technical solutions and capacity building solutions that are already quite well ahead of addressing some of these challenges. This involves things like how to ensure we use authoritative data sets and data sources. How do we make prompting in generative AI powered solutions more nuanced? That comes back to Michael's point about generative AI being built for dialogue, not to read your mind and understand what answers you want to get out of it, but it's really a process of engagement. But also some of the more technical solutions to counter these risks, which could be, chain of thought agents. It could be multi-agent environments to make sure that we are tuning the outputs of AI to user needs. So there's a lot there that we can do, but what we need is for that narrative of risk to be balanced out with the narrative of very real solutions. And I think that's really a key to maybe not so much building trust overnight, but at least starting to erode that narrative of fear. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Karen. And before Michael, did you want to react to the same question? It's going to move to a different question for Chris.
I did, but I'm number 3 in my hands up. Are there other panel members that had their hand up before me? So politely, I'm happy to join the queue.
I don't know, Christine, did you want to either add or a follow-up question to that?
Well, I was moving to follow up, actually. I myself have undergone a conversion from reticence, let's say, to a conviction that we actually have a mandate to learn. And I really liked, again, Roger Spitz, who's comparing it to math. There's a certain basic knowledge that we now all need to integrate. And I'm adding to that, I believe with that, that the kind of human considerations, the kind of ethical thinking of the implications, it would be good if we could integrate this into our capacity building, our formation. But I notice in the chat, a couple of questions about children. And we see that I believe we've done a fairly poor job with social media. And lots of studies are coming out now about how well we could have done better in terms of our usage as humanity, and our children really are vulnerable. So I'm interested in the panelists' response to that question. And
Christine, we'll pivot to that in a second. Let's close the loop on this question, and we'll come to that one. Thanks, Christine. So I have Mike, he wants to react, and then I'm going to go over to USG Jill, and also ask him a question before he has to leave us. So over to you, Mike.
I think if I can sort of add to what Karen was talking about, that when she went back to the issue of trust, and I think it's an important one, because when working particularly with generative AI, one of the challenges that you will face is this idea of hallucination, where its job is to try and almost complete the sentence, if you like, or find some of those gaps, in which case you may not get accurate information. But I think it is also our responsibility as technologists to try and understand, how do we address that? How do we build architectures that look and avoid some of those issues? So, for example, we built a bot that helped people interact with our various HR policies and documents, right? And we restricted its ability to hallucinate by saying, all the information you come up with must only exist within these HR documents and these HR policies, which is really useful, because that's thousands of pages for somebody to read when you're trying to answer a specific question. But AI will save you tons of time, give you the exact answer that you're looking for, but also help you interact with that document, where you have a conversation to find out a little bit more about the particular situation that you're dealing with, get to an answer quicker, but even start thinking about, what are my next steps beyond that? So I think there are ways to start trying to address the trust, but I think you're right, Karen, that it is something we can't sort of blindly avoid. Yeah.
Thanks. And I'd like to now hand over to ESG Jill. I think you wanted to react to some of those answers, but if at the same time you wanted to answer the question about, you had mentioned caution and this kind of skepticism from some people. There was a question about job cuts, and if we're gaining efficiency, does that also mean reducing our employment opportunities, and how you would counter some of those concerns? Over to you.
Thanks. Maybe let me start with that. So this is for real. We recently did a report with ILO on the impact of AI on the future of work, the job replacement side, but more displacement and skill shifts. So again, going back to preparing for this future, because within each role today, take call centers, for example, a tremendous opportunity for educated youth in many of the global South countries. Look at the Maghreb, for example, and that's under threat from AI chatbots, AI agents that are getting smarter and smarter. So governments need to prepare for that. And also we need to look at the algorithmic management of labor. So there are human rights issues there that need to be looked at. I think Karen's point about collaboration, I just wanted to offer some thoughts there. I think, yes, it's very important that we look at healthy competition so that, the humanitarian ecosystem kind of keeps evolving, and tech is an opportunity there. Take data, for example. So curating high quality, diverse, representative data sets across the humanitarian sector through collaborative projects. And these need not go into sensitive areas, but some of the meta stuff, like, which kind of informs, there's a loop from there to policy and smart operations efficiency, resource efficiency, but also prompt response. What are the lessons that you can pool across? Even in tricky areas like airline safety, people have started to pool data together so that everyone benefits in a sense. So I think that's one area. Governance, definitely, building principles together, some of those semi-soft norms that I spoke about. So data commons, governance principles, incentives, and then some kind of a stock taking of solutions in this space. So what did we learn? What went north? What went south or sideways? And what does it mean? I think everyone will benefit from that. So use the technology as an excuse to drive collaboration. So I have to head out now, but it was a pleasure, and please feel free to reach out. And I'd also like to invite actors in this space, multi-stakeholder actors, to take a look at the GDC and consider endorsing it. The SG is going to present an update on the GDC endorsement in December. So it'd be good to have you join, the 300 plus stakeholders who have already come together to pledge support. And that's a starting point for some of the kind of normative convergence that we spoke about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, USC Jill, for joining us. And we'll be sure to look at the Global Data Compact follow up, and we'll reach out to your office if we have further questions. We have, thank you so much. We have about 20 minutes left. And I also want to give the panelists all a chance to give some closing remarks, but there are many questions that we didn't get to yet. And so now I'd like to turn to Chris, if you would please address the question on, first on safeguarding. I think there's a question about the use of AI in sectors such as education and health and protection, and especially concerns about safeguarding for children. And then there was another question on ethical use as well. So you spoke about the different principles of ethics.
Yeah, thanks very much. And of course, these are at the heart of some of the elements of the value-based policy approaches that the ICRC tries to work with. And maybe a way of kind of combining the questions is to give you examples of some of the areas where we're now at the pilot stage. And what we've done in terms of partnering actually is to work with the Swiss Technical Institute in Zurich and others, Yale, Cambridge, to try to test a few things to see what works. So these aren't ones where I can say this worked, this didn't. It's just we're trying it. But each time we do these tests, we have a local actor as well that we work with. So it's essentially the ICRC plus an academic institution plus local NGOs or research outfits in areas of armed conflict or other situations of violence. So perhaps I can just give you a few of those. And we try to, when we do this work, build in those ethical considerations, including those, as you mentioned, relating to children. So I'll give you three of them. The first is trying to figure out, can we use predictive modeling, a little bit like Amazon does, to try to determine when, in a given situation, we're more likely to see increases, spikes in medical supply needs. So, for example, we provide assistance to a lot of surgical facilities in and near armed conflicts, and some of the patterns are cyclical, and we may have overlooked a connection between certain information that could be gathered and it could be seasonal, it could be relating to the weather, and that may drive a spike in needs of medical supplies. Well, we want to pre-position those supplies to make sure that we don't run out in order to provide better medical outcomes in a given area. So that's one. It's basically forecasting and demand planning, and that doesn't have that many risks associated. It's just pre-positioning goods, for example. So that's one. The second is there are certain parts of the world where vitamin B1 deficiency has huge negative outcomes among detainees in various places. And some of the detainees are actually a bit young. But knowing when you are likely to see an increase in beriberi, the disease associated with vitamin B1 deficiency, is sometimes not always obvious. Well, one thing you can do so that you don't have to take sort of blood tests or anything is, but you can go into populations and just take quick saliva samples. Of course, you don't individualize. You don't even ask people's names. You don't have to. And you just get enough of them over a certain area, and then it will tell you in the population whether there are vitamin B1 deficiencies, thiamine deficiencies. And you can then act in places where people are not going to be able to respond very well to this if they're incarcerated in places of armed conflict. And so that's another area where we're using AI tools with, as I say, with academic institutions, but also local actors on the ground to try to come up with better outcomes. And then a third is there is some work now on trying to detect what's sometimes called NTL, or nighttime light. So using satellite imagery, if you detect patterns in the use of lights at nighttime, there are some links that are evident between crises in a given area for various reasons, man-made and non-man-made. And so we're just exploring right now the limits of that, but it can provide a little bit of information to our delegations on the ground to say, okay, we're noticing a significant change in nighttime light use in an area of armed conflict. Maybe we need to be thinking carefully about what we can do to find out more about that situation on the ground. But in each of these, as I say, we have sort of ETH, EPFL, which are in Lausanne and in Zurich that we work with. We have, of course, the ICRC itself and various partners on the ground that are helping us with some of these. And so that's one way that we try to partner it. And we're always thinking about what are the potential negative consequences, do no harm, etc. We try to build that in. And at least in those three examples, we think we're on reasonably good ground, but it's still at the pilot stage. And so we're still trying to learn as much as we can. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that time went really quickly, and we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to give each of our panelists some time to react to any of the remaining questions, or if there's some key takeaways you want us to reflect upon. And I'm going to go in reverse order this time and ask Michael, you have 3 minutes to share with us some final thoughts, and then I'll go Michael, Karen, and back to you, Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I think sort of just in closing, what I would say is, our mission as humanitarians really is urgent, and the opportunities are significant. They're vast. So we cannot by any means let caution sort of turn into inertia, right? I'm speaking really from that position of really hoping that we can find a way to strive a balance. There is of advancing, innovation responsibly, but while ensuring the safeguards at the same time. And I think the responsibility is ours. It's up to us to harness this transformative power. And unfortunately, the bad actors are accelerating at a pace way faster than we are at this stage, while we obsess about safety. I think those two things are not, in competition. I think they work together, safety and innovation. And what we need to do is strike that balance. So I'd love for us to, to almost take as a commitment, that we're going to go with a balanced approach where we embrace AI really as a tool for progress, a tool for hope, and a tool that we can really use for impact. So yeah, that's my final words.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's true that it sounds like artificial intelligence has the power to make bad people more evil, and hopefully we could also make good people more virtuous. Over to you, Karen, for some also parting thoughts from your side.
Oh, so much to say, but I have forced them into 3 key bullet points that we probably haven't really touched upon, but I know that some questions in the Slack did. One of them is how do we scale the solutions, and how do we move past the situation where we have a lot of small, seemingly resource-rich organizations, initiatives that simply do not reach local organizations, and definitely not local communities. And I think in that question of scaling from pilot and prototypes to actually use solutions, I want to just emphasize that technology is not the rocket fuel here. And the rocket fuel here really is, point one, good data. And good data is data that is diverse, coming from both international organizations and local organizations and diaspora groups. So bringing us all together in building these reliable, authoritative data sets is really going to be the rocket fuel of scalable solutions. But on the softer side, then, scalability often gets tangled up in a sad reality that perhaps we don't have an advanced enough data culture in the humanitarian sector yet for actually AI-driven outputs to actually be hooked onto decision-making processes. So we should be also asking what type of new data cultures and what types of new humanitarian leadership is required for us as a community to actually see that that AI-powered outputs actually result in more effective and faster decisions. And that the issue of what does humanitarian leadership in the age of AI look like is something that I'm really interested in. And my third point, maybe as a takeaway to everyone, is we need to be careful not to hold AI to higher standards than humans themselves and humanitarians themselves. And pre-AI, adoption in the humanitarian sector, we spent a lot of time talking about do no harm. Us as humanitarians, we talked a lot about child safeguarding. We talked a lot about integrity, and these conversations seem to be fading to the background. And I just want to kind of emphasize that while we're holding AI and technology to accountable, we need to continue to hold ourselves accountable to just being safe humans for affected populations. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen, for this parting thoughts. Very insightful. I'm going to now ask Chris to give us also some of his parting thoughts before I sum up, and also suggest that there are some topics we didn't get to, and perhaps we could organize more events in the series. But let's hear from Chris first.
Yeah, thanks very much, Wendy. What I might do is just emphasize that it's possible to both be a good humanitarian and to use AI. It is possible to do that. I would, as I said earlier, encourage you to just have a look. If you sign up for the ICRC's War and Law blog, you'll be notified when the new policy comes out. It should be fairly soon. And engage with us about it. We're still learning. It's our attempt to put out essentially what an AI policy looks like for humanitarians, and if it's useful for others, we'd like that. So we'd encourage humanitarians, including those in the UN system, to try to apply the humanitarian principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence, possibly in the ways we do, but possibly there's things we've missed as well. So we're looking to refine that over time. So it would just be a plea to engage with us, and we look forward to continued collaboration with members of the IASC and others relating to this topic of AI and humanitarian action. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. So I have some final closing remarks. First, I just want to thank all the speakers for this really insightful, and obviously USG Jill, who's no longer with us. I think we covered a range of topics. We were also given some takeaway reading. I think USG Jill recommended AI Snake Oil as a book to look at. We will have the ICRC, we'll be keeping our eyes out for the ICRC policy as it comes. Very eager to learn more about the 3 C's that Michael referred to on creativity, obviously, collaboration, and consistency on the application of AI. And the humanity portion is front and center. So as I put in the chat, that we envisage this as just one in a series of briefings about artificial intelligence and humanitarian action. There were topics such as localization, such as ensuring accountability to affected population, no aid for us without us. We would like to maybe look at those as future topics. So please do enter in the chat if there are additional topics you'd like us to organize in this series, as well as any speakers we should highlight. This briefing has been recorded and will be posted online in the coming days on the Interagency Standing Committee website. We encourage you also to follow the Interagency Standing Committee social media accounts to learn of forthcoming briefings and to engage with us as well if you have additional recommendations or feedback from this briefing. I really, again, want to highlight that we were really excited to hear about the potential uses of artificial intelligence, and we had some very practical examples, both from IOM and ICRC, and we acknowledge some of the key concerns of ethics and governance and the efforts the United Nations is taking to address them through the Global Digital Compact as well, from the UN's Tech Envoy. And we also spoke about and hopefully got some agreement around the benefits of collaboration at global and local levels, how we can both share lessons and knowledge and approaches, and that we can enhance the capacity to be both better humanitarians using artificial intelligence in a judicious way. So thanks again to our speakers, and I look forward to seeing you at our next Interagency Standing Committee briefing. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Chris. Good to see you,
Thank you,
Christine.
Wendy. Thank you.